Good afternoon, book lovers. It's Robert Boyd. I've got another book report for you today. And today it is this book, Eileen, by Ottessa Moshfegh. I'm guessing on the pronunciation of her last name. I don't know. Anyway, I had this on my shelves for forever. I think I bought it new when it came out. And the reason I bought it was because I liked the cover. I recognized the artist on the cover is a Swiss cartoonist named Thomas Ott, and he's got this very moody kind of noirish drawing style, which turns out to be pretty perfect for this book. It's when I've read descriptions of it, the descriptions have said that the story is kind of noirish, and that there's some truth to that, although it's not. That seems like kind of an overstatement. Excuse me, I'm feeling a little out of focus here. And so I had it for a long time, and I think I read like 10 pages and just didn't finish it. But I decided to go ahead and finish it, and I did, and I'm glad I did, because it was pretty good. I'm going to warn you right now that in my discussion of it, there will be spoilers, but I'll try to warn you. I'll try to alert you when we're about to get to the spoilerish parts. And anyway, it's the story of Eileen Dunlop, who is a protagonist. It's a first-person novel, so she's writing about herself, but she's writing about herself as a very young woman from the remove of being quite a bit older, and she looks at her old self as not a good person, and really, as you read this, you'll see that her young self was not a good person. If you're one of these people who requires that your protagonist be likable, then this is probably not a book for you. But she's unlikable in a kind of compelling way. She like I said, she's a young woman. She lives with her father. She's 24 years old in the book. She lives with her father, who's forced to retire from the local police department in the town that she lives in. She never identifies by name. She keeps calling it Xville. But it's supposedly a small town in coastal Massachusetts. So, which it struck me as funny. The cover shows this car with these mountains behind it, and I know there's some hills in coastal Massachusetts, but not many. It's not like western Massachusetts, which has small mountains. But it's dark, so who knows? And the car is kind of important to the story, so at least to the climax of the story, which will be a spoiler. In any case, she's living with her father. Her father was a police officer. I'm not sure whether he's a sergeant or captain or what, but he was is a hardcore alcoholic, and was kind of kicked off the force. Although they let him resign or retire, and her job, one of her responsibilities, has been to prevent him from going out into the neighborhood and causing trouble. So she takes all his shoes and hides them in the trunk of her car to keep him from walking through the neighborhood, at least in winter, I guess. And she works at a local juvenile prison called Moorhead, and which sounds. I mean, the book is set in the early '60s. I think Kennedy is still president, but I might be wrong. Moorhead sounds like a total hellhole, as any juvenile prison inevitably is. And she has no friends. She has no kind of emotional life beyond not wanting to have any sort of relationship with anyone. She talks about having a death mask. Her only entertainment is to check out books from the library, and she describes one she checked out had photos of of death masks of famous people, and she cultivates that look because she wants to have no emotion showing. No, she doesn't want to communicate anything with her look. And the people she works with are, it seems, totally terrible. Although she doesn't really know that much about them. And the one that she does know something about is a prison guard named Randy, who she's attracted to. But of course, he doesn't know she exists because she's this mousy little girl who wears a death mask all day long. She meets, parents of the offenders when they come for visiting hours, and that seems like kind of a traumatic experience. But for her, it breaks up the day. In any case, she's telling the story from a remove of many years, and she's lived a full life since then. Although we don't really know that much about it, except that she's been married before. But at the time of the book, she was not married. She was living with her father in this little Massachusetts seaside town, and but she knows, her future self knows, she's about to leave town for good, and and she tells you this right at the beginning of the book. So all the way through the book, you're like saying, "Okay, get out of town, do something." You're waiting for something to happen, and for a long time, nothing happens in the book, which a long story about a totally unpleasant person, which nothing happens, is not like, a gripping piece of fiction. But I kept reading because I knew something would happen. Finally, and okay, we're going to start getting into spoiler stuff, but not terribly spoilers. A new employee starts at the prison, a woman named Rebecca. Doesn't seem too much older than Eileen, and but Eileen is entranced by her because she seems so vivacious and interesting compared to the mean old biddies who work in the office at the prison hitherto. And so she tries to charm Rebecca, although she has no knowledge of how to charm somebody. And Rebecca is kind of like, hey, here's somebody who I can be friends with, who's near my own age. And Rebecca's been hired to be to design a curriculum for the boys in the prison, so that they can keep studying whatever they're studying. And she goes out drinking with Eileen once, which Eileen, like her father, is kind of an alcoholic, although her father's like an extreme alcoholic, and Eileen's kind of like alcoholic light. But she's not like a barfly type, and so she goes to like the one bar in town that she knows of with Rebecca, and she knows the bartender because she's had to come pick up her drunken dad from that bar many times, and the bartender knows her, and it's a working class bar in a working class Massachusetts town. So a beautiful woman like Rebecca walks in, she gets noticed by all the barflies. But nothing happens, and but they form a link, a friendship. Then there's a kid in the prison named Lee. Now this is where the spoilers really begin. Lee murdered his father by slitting his throat, and his mother comes to visit him at pretty much at Rebecca's request, because Rebecca thinks there's something fishy about Lee's story, and so the mother comes, and they really don't say anything to each other, and Lee can't meet her eyes, and I'm going to read a little bit about. I'm going to read a few sections that I think are show what kind of a book this is. Okay, she's at a coffee shop. Eileen is, and Ottessa writes, the waitress stood and fixed her apron strings and chewed her gum. Her uniform was mustard yellow with a white collar. Over it she wore a pink sweater and shiny black beads embroidered along the neck. They looked like busy ants swarming at her throat. I liked that. Okay, and now she's talking about Lee. All set, I told her. She took her coat back from Randy, her coat being Lee's mom's coat, and Randy being the guard that she's in love with, and sat across the table from Leonard, or Lee as he was called. Mrs. Polk was shifty-eyed. The boy just smiled. I looked from mother to son. If Rebecca's theory of Oedipus was correct, perhaps I had grossly misjudged what kind of woman young men found attractive these days, because Mrs. Polk was nobody I could imagine anyone would kill for. And Rebecca has this, Oedipus theory, which turns out to be totally wrong, but it's fascinating to Eileen, I think, to imagine it. So after the night at the bar with Rebecca, Eileen drove home drunk, of course, puked in her car, and somehow made it inside, and the puke froze. And here's a disgusting description of this from the next day. From under the bathroom sink, I grabbed a bunch of rags and went back out to the car and slid the vomit off the passenger seat and into the snow. It was remarkable how easy it was to remove the frozen puddle in one piece, but it left a stain. Somehow that image of a frozen puddle of vomit stuck in my mind. So anyway, Rebecca talks to Lee, who has up till now been totally uncommunicative. Not that anyone's really tried to communicate with the kid, to try and figure out what happened. And it turns out to be worse than you can imagine. And here are the spoilers. It turns out that Lee was being raped by his father, and that his mother helped. Not really, helped in a sense of like she wasn't in the room when it was happening, but she would prepare Lee for his father's predations, and got something out of it, which was his father, who had basically stopped being physical with Lee's mother, suddenly became more intimate. Anyway, it's a disgusting, gross story, and what Rebecca does is, she feels that Lee's in prison unjustifiably because, he was a victim, and that Mrs. Polk, Lee's mother, has to confess for this to go away. And so she basically kidnaps the mother and ties her up, and with Eileen's help, the mother confesses everything. And then the plan is to somehow do Mrs. Polk in, which, as I said, spoilers here, Eileen does by knocking her out with drugs that her mother had. Her mother has died when Eileen was 19, and she had painkillers, and so she feeds the painkillers to Mrs. Polk, and then leaves her in the car, which has a damaged exhaust system, so whenever she drives it, it fills up with carbon monoxide. So consequently, whenever Eileen is driving it, she has to roll down the windows, and it is cold in New England in winter. But her deal is that she's going to basically put Miss Polk in the driver's seat, leave the car running, and Miss Polk will asphyxiate, which apparently she does. Then here's towards the end. Here's a bit where Eileen is remembering something from her childhood. I recall that when I was 12, a girl a few towns over went missing, and they found her naked body washed up on the rocks at the beach in Exville. Quote, "Don't take rides from strangers," unquote, and "Scream if someone tries to grab you," unquote, our teacher said to warn us. But the alarm never scared me. On the contrary, being kidnapped was something of a secret wish of mine. At least I know I mattered to someone, and that I was of value. And considering how horrible both her parents were, although nothing compared to Leonard Polk's parents, you kind of understand this, and that is part of the subject matter of this. Is that, to quote Philip Larkin, parents, they can fuck you up, and Eileen is fucked up by that. And anyway, so she leaves Leonard Polk's mom to asphyxiate and hops a train and leaves town forever, and that's the end of the book. Anyway, it's a very weird but kind of gripping book, and I'm interested in reading more that the author has to write. And I think this was her, I don't know if this was her first novel, but I think it was her first novel by a major publisher. She might have had one before that. But I think she's written at least one book since then, so there's more Ottessa Moshfegh to read. And I have to say, I've never heard the name Ottessa anywhere. It's a very weird name. And apparently, her mother was Croatian, and her father was an Iranian Jew, and she was born in Boston. So, Ottessa is, I assume, either Croatian or Iranian or Hebrew or something. Anyway, that's Eileen. Oh, and I'm going to mention one other thing. Thomas Ott didn't just do the cover; he also designed the type on the cover, and that red surrounded with white is typical of what I've seen him do in his comics. He was kind of a big deal in comics. I don't know, about 15 years ago or so. But I don't know what he's done since. I mean, I don't think he's had new comics come out in a while. He might just be working as an illustrator. And he's a good illustrator, so I'm sure that's a slightly more lucrative career option than being a comics artist. Anyway, Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. Check it out.